tell you relationships are critical in Washington. But how do you A, find out who the key players are, and B, figure out how to reach out to them? Well, I want to tell you about Leadership Connect. It's been an absolute lifesaver for us as we expand our operations and outreach here at Washington Tech. Leadership Connect, it's the digital service used by top federal contractors and government affairs leaders to contact decision makers and develop those strategic relationships. Visit leadershipconnect.io and join the community. I love it, and I'm 100% sure you will too. That's leadershipconnect.io. Try it now.
When people are replaced by robots, it's not that you come to work one day and they say a robot is now coming to take your job. It's that something happens, you get laid off, and then you just never get hired back on.
Welcome to the Washington Tech Policy Podcast.
The latest tech law and policy news and brightest tech law and policy experts wherever you are.
So you can stay informed, on the move, in less time.
From Washington, D.C., it's the Washington Tech Policy Podcast.
With Joe Miller.
Joe Miller.
Domestic violence cases rise worldwide as coronavirus lockdowns prevent victims from escaping their abusers. Public transportation systems falter amid the coronavirus. And Jessica Fulton is my guest today. Hey everybody, the New York Times reports that domestic violence cases are rising around the world, citing data provided by domestic violence hotlines, which have seen an uptick in calls over the last month. Rihanna and Twitter's Jack Dorsey have stepped in, though, by contributing a combined $4.2 million to a new effort to address domestic abuse. Jack Dorsey also announced this week that he'll be contributing $1 billion of his own money to the coronavirus fight. Axios reported this week that public transportation systems are struggling to hold on as coronavirus lockdowns and a rise in coronavirus cases among transit employees have all but crippled transportation systems across the country, causing massive losses in revenue to the tune of some $38 billion combined. The transit crisis threatens essential workers in particular, many of which are people of color who rely on public transportation to get to work. Apple and Google have joined forces to launch a system that uses Bluetooth to track the spread of coronavirus. The companies plan to share the data with government and health agencies, but the tracking would be opt-in only, and only public health officials would be permitted to use the data. The technology works not by tracking location data, but by tracking individuals to better determine how the disease travels from person to person. Ars Technica reports that while Comcast has the best program for low-income consumers during the coronavirus pandemic, Verizon, Charter, and other carriers are coming up short. While Verizon is offering steeply discounted internet service, it's only available to Fios subscribers and not consumers who use DSL. Verizon says its DSL service is too slow since it's making its discounted service available to Lifeline consumers only, and that its DSL service doesn't meet the FCC's minimum speed requirement for Lifeline. The availability of high-speed internet service around the country is inconsistent, with different regions having more access than others, which highlights discriminatory redlining. Neighborly, an app that helps landlords screen tenant applicants, is engaging in some curious tactics during this uncertain time of mass unemployment. As the number of unemployment claims has soared in recent weeks, the company has been flagging tenants who haven't paid rent since April 1st. Finally, the state of North Carolina is looking to set up and improve its online voting system to allow voters to cast their ballots without leaving home. Activists are concerned about privacy violations and the potential for hacks and voter suppression. And you can find links to all these stories in the show notes. Stay with us.
The voice of tech policy, Washington Tech. We see you.
My guest today is Jessica Fulton, Vice President at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, where she engages in research and analysis to identify policies that advance the socioeconomic status of the Black community. She also manages the Joint Center's Policy Incubator. Prior to joining the Joint Center, she served as External Relations Director at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. She has also held positions at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute and the Chicago Urban League. Jessica is a member of Delta Sigma Theta and serves as board chair of the Black Swan Academy. Jessica earned a bachelor's in economics from the University of Chicago and a master's from Depaul University. Jessica Fulton. So the inclination, I think, is to put tech and communications policy on hold while we try to address COVID-19.
This is something that I've been worried about probably since we decided to send our team home to work from home a few weeks ago. And specifically, I was worried about the unique impacts that coronavirus and a potential slowdown on the economy might have on Black workers and marginalized communities more generally. I'd been particularly concerned about Black unemployment because even before this crisis, we had an unemployment rate of about 6%. So that's historically low for Black workers, but it's about twice the national unemployment rate. And, I graduated college into a recession. So this is just really worrying to me, right? And we've actually kind of seen what I think are some of my worst fears come true. We've already seen massive layoffs and hiring freezes. And last week, over 3 million people actually applied for unemployment insurance for the first time. And that is, higher than it's ever been. That's like more than the population of Chicago. And so that's something that we really need to be concerned about and figuring out how we're going to address that. And we know that, when it rains in America, it pours for people of color. And so we're going to see kind of massive unemployment, and that's probably going to last for a while. Organizationally, the Joint Center, we wanted to think about what were the other issues that might be affecting Black communities and folks of color. So we hosted a conversation with leaders representing, various civil rights organizations and think tanks to talk specifically about Black communities with Congresswoman Karen Bass. So she's the current chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and she just spent some time talking to us about some of the concerns that folks in the group had. I think one thing that people are talking a lot about, and that I know from listening to your show, is that we have a racial divide in access to affordable broadband, right? But social distancing is requiring people to rely on internet, both for work, for school, and one thing that I hadn't really thought about, for telemedicine, right? So for folks who maybe need to get to the doctor, but they're unable to, making sure that they have access to that is going to be really key.
And certainly mental health would be included in that. And I saw some research from Gig Economy that talks about how people of color are more highly represented as agency temps, on call, and contract company employees, and they're more likely to be African American or Hispanic, as I said. Whereas freelance consultants and independent contractors are more likely to be white. And I think we spend a lot of time focusing on 1099 employees, but we don't talk about how W-2 employees are treated and how they don't receive benefits either. It's just the fact that they're classified as W-2 employees that prevents a lot of people, I think, from advocating for them.
People forget that everybody does not get paid sick days. Everybody does not get paid family leave. People aren't able to just stay home and take care of themselves and take care of their families. And I think that's something that this entire situation is really bringing to light. I've been thinking a lot about the people who don't get to stay home. So childcare workers. I have an aunt that's a nursing assistant. She's going in every day, right, to the retirement home that she works at to take care of folks, grandparents and parents. And, those are jobs where Black and brown women are really overrepresented, and they're not necessarily getting access to the kinds of supports that they might need to really take care of themselves.
So, and your aunt, is she a contract worker or is she full-time?
She's full-time. She's a W-2 employee, right? And it's a good job for her. It's a stable job for her. definitely doesn't pay as much as it probably should. And she does not get the kinds of benefits to say like, hey, she's also taking care of my grandmother. She should be able to stay at home so that she's not putting herself at risk and then coming home to put my grandmother at risk, right? And so I think those are the kinds of folks that aren't really getting considered in this debate right now.
Yeah.
Also, we know that a lot of workers, like as we speak, are going on strike, right? Delivery drivers, food service, retail. Those are all folks who are W-2 employees, right? They are earning at or just above minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour in this country, right? And they really are the folks that are keeping the economy moving and keeping this country running right now while we sit at home. And there's some provisions in the bill that was just passed that'll bump it up for folks. But it's still not enough for folks to take care of themselves. And if we want to keep the economy moving, we got to keep money in folks' pockets, right? Or else everything slows down.
And what are you seeing in the bill? What works and what doesn't?
One of the things that I was particularly concerned about is the stimulus kind of check that people are talking about, that they're going to get the $1,200 a month for folks under a certain income, the $500 per kid. That is great, but it's probably not enough. And it definitely isn't enough for the most vulnerable folks, right? So like if you earn so little that you don't have to file a tax return, you're going to have to try to figure out how to file a tax return in order to get that money. And I would imagine that that's probably going to be a challenge given that businesses are not open. People don't have the ability to do that. Some immigrant communities aren't even eligible to receive these stimulus payments. It's going to go in direct deposit, right? So we know a lot of communities don't even have access to banking. They definitely don't have checking accounts and didn't set up direct deposit the last time they filed their taxes so that the IRS can deposit a check into their account. And so that's one piece. I think one thing that I was really surprised about is the bill doesn't increase SNAP benefits. So SNAP benefits are like, I guess they used to be called food stamps. It doesn't increase the amount of money that people are able to get for those. And that's something that we know works. And that's something that we did in the last recession, right? Like we made sure to account for that. And somehow that got left out of this last bill. And I feel like that was really low hanging fruit.
And it's also something that determines whether they get access to lifeline benefits if they can't afford broadband.
Exactly. There's also a provision that has funds going directly to cities with more than 500,000 people. But like most people don't live in cities with greater than 500,000 residents, right? Like I'm from a place I think there's 42,000 people in my hometown right now. And we're like the big town in my area. And so thinking about how communities that are maybe rural and under-resourced, how they prepare their communities, how they make sure that the folks who work in their government stay employed. Like those are going to be really critical conversations that they're going to have as they move forward.
We're going to take a quick break. What happens next in the policy process and other issues the Joint Center is considering as we deal with COVID-19? Stay with us. So what happens next, Jessica, in the policy process from your perspective?
Up first, we're going to hear more from a lot of states and towns about how they're planning to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in their communities, right? Because they're going to have to respond to the laws that have already been passed as people try to figure out, what these laws really mean for their constituents. We're also going to see them figuring out how they can put more resources towards keeping their own economies running. I think at the federal level, we can expect for another few, maybe 1 to 2 more stimulus bills at least. they are going to need to spend some real time thinking about which policies are particularly important. They're no longer on the kind of rapid response timeline, and so they have some time to kind of be very thoughtful. There's some legislation, specifically, there's a bill in the Financial Services Committee that I think will address some issues around rent and assistance for folks who have private landlords, also student loan debt. We're going to need to spend some time being very intentional so that we don't fall deeper into a recession.
Yeah. What other issues is the Joint Center considering these days?
We are kind of focused on a few different topics that we've been thinking about for a while. We're continuing our congressional staff diversity work. One of the things that I thought was really interesting that someone on our team brought up last week was, this Senate bill was crafted largely without people of color staffers in kind of key roles as they made decisions on, what they would move forward on as far as provisions. And that's something that we're always thinking about and we'll be releasing a report on soon. We're thinking about the future of work and specifically those issues that you talked about around gig workers, but we're also thinking about how automation may impact Black and Latino workers moving forward. One of the things that this particular crisis kind of highlights is that a lot of research says that, when people are replaced by robots, it's not that you come to work one day and they say a robot is now coming to take your job. It's that something happens, you get laid off, and then you just never get hired back on. And so thinking about what this particular downturn means for folks and how they should think about whether or not they're going to be able to go back to work when this is all over or not is something that's kind of at the forefront of our minds. And I think the final thing is around data privacy. And specifically, we're thinking about this in a number of ways, but because it's 2020 and our democracy is already having some issues, we are thinking about ad targeting and voter suppression of Black communities. We know already that in 2016, a lot of the ad targeting was targeted towards Black folks, and we actually were more receptive to it than a lot of other communities, right? So Black folks clicked on ads. And so thinking about what that means for the 2020 election and domestic actors. We also, part of the coronavirus issue is around elections and how we make sure that we have secure primaries and elections in 2020. And, if we are social distancing, how do we make sure that we're equipped to do voting by mail or, make sure that we still have the turnout that we need? The data privacy piece is just a really key part of it.
Yeah, and figuring out how that plays into security. And there aren't enough of us working on the policy level that are certified for privacy, law and policy, cybersecurity. So one of the things that I've been doing during this time is, going on to Pluralsight and putting together, and getting some of those tech skills so that if we stay in this situation for, some of the estimates have it going on for 12 to 18 months, that there will be somebody prepared to deal with all of the privacy and cybersecurity issues that will arise with more people being monitored if they are not working remotely and they're making deliveries. Kind of scary if you think about employers, kind of if an employee decides to stop at a store or something for a break, kind of disconcerting thinking about the fact that their employer might be able to monitor that through data location. So just a ton of issues to think about. Final ideas you'd like to leave with us before we close, and where can we find you online?
Yeah, so you can visit us at www.jointcenter.org. We will be posting resources specifically on Black communities and COVID-19 policy on our website. So, and also if you have resources to share, please send them our way. Wait, I forgot the rest of your question. Sorry.
Where people can find you online.
Yep, www.jointcenter.org.
Jessica Fulton, Vice President at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. Jessica, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
That concludes episode 226 of the podcast. Thanks for listening. If you like what we do here, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd love to hear from you, and it helps others find out about the show. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care.